Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Whether we're ready for it or not, it is a good evening because we are all together. My name's Danielle Gerard. I'm first vice president of Three Parks, former president, former benefit runner. Lorraine is dealing with a family issue and has asked me to step in, which is actually my function, so it's fine. I want to welcome you all. I know people are still going to be trickling in, but we have a very busy evening this evening, so I'd like to say that we are going to have Donna Lieberman of the New York Civil Liberties Union and Ross Barkan, who is a journalist and contributes to a bunch of publications, including the New York Times Magazine. So we have a really interesting evening in front of us. The first thing I wanted to do before I go through a litany of thank yous, because you have all been marvelous, is I want to let you know that we have something to look forward to in our future, our very immediate future, which is the Three Parks holiday party. You'll be getting notification about that from Chuck Wall, wave your hands, our newsletter editor. And it will be Sunday, December 15th at Abigail's at 102nd and Broadway from 4 to 6. And we will eat, drink, and be merry, for goodness sake, on that day. But I do want to say that working with all of you is always a highlight of, certainly of my life, and I know for a lot of the other board members. And I just want to extend all of you a very, very hearty thanks for everything you did. We could not have succeeded in the 3 congressional races that we won without you. So we do have a reputation as the premier grassroots organizing club. There are elected officials who belong to other clubs who tell us on the sly that we are their favorite club, that they love coming to talk to us, and it's because we do the best grassroots organizing there is. So how many people here did anything at all, whether it was postcarding, phone banking, trips to Pennsylvania, trips to Long Island, upstate, and everywhere else? Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. I would like also to thank the entire Three Parks board, especially a couple of people who are not here tonight, but I'm going to talk about them anyway. Lorraine for her indefatigable leadership, Steve and Lynn Max for everything they do. Some of you may have seen the palm card to vote against Propositions 2 through 6, which were a mayoral power grab that Steve designed. Lynn is just a wealth of information on everything. Faye and Roger, who were there every day, entering data, welcoming people at the reception desk. People like Michael, who's at the back table, and Marianne at the back table for their presence at the button tables all the time, to Paul for all the work he did. Paul, wave your hand. Wave your hand. There you go. That's Paul. We're going to hear from a couple of members who had a particular interest. Miriam Raban, who had a particular interest in the Josh Riley win upstate, and Wendy Diller, who had a particular interest in the Laura Gillen win on Long Island. But I just want to say that the committee that really ran things consisted of Lorraine and Chuck and Lynn and Steve and Corinne, who is sidelined with a bad foot. And I also want to call out a couple of other people who are not on the board who are here tonight. Willie and Deborah and Barbara, and I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody who was instrumental in what go on. Teresa, can you wave your hand, who works at the Board of Election nonstop, hasn't slept in forever. Emma, wave your hand, another non-board member who was with us, passing out the pink flyers that were recreated every week to list our activities. Our phone banks were completely jammed up every time that we did them for Harris Walls, for John Tester. It's just been really exciting. And to all of you who wrote postcards, we sent 8,000 postcards on behalf of Pat Ryan, Josh Riley, and Tom Swazi, who reached out to us specifically for us to send postcards. So if I've forgotten anybody, I'm very sorry, but I don't think I have. At least I hope not tonight, because I sure did last time. Without further ado, I'm going to call Miriam up to talk to us a little bit about what she did for Josh Riley, so please give her a hand.
Well, thank you all for all you did, and I'm very happy that we had a win in NY19. So, yes, here's my button of vintage from the last race in 2022. So the Board of Three Parks asked me to talk briefly tonight about the victory of Josh Riley for Congress, representing NY19 in the House. I think I was asked because I made it a personal priority to focus on winning that congressional district back and helping Josh win. I grew up in New York. I felt, yes, not talking at you, I felt that when we lost congressional districts to the Republicans, personally annoyed. And I just made it my personal priority to work really hard in NY19. I have a little house in NY19 in Columbia County, and I just thought that's where I could have most impact. So I was asked to briefly describe the district, the Democrat and Republican candidates, and to share my thoughts about why Josh Riley was able to win this large and very challenging district. So for those of you who don't know, NY19 is a very large district that runs from the east, Columbia, part of Ulster, Sullivan County, across the southern tier, all the way to Ithaca in Tompkins County. When I drive from my house in Columbia County, close to the Massachusetts border, to visit my cousin in Ithaca, it takes me 3.5 hours. So it's quite challenging for campaigning. It also covers several media districts, and that is also quite difficult when you're dealing with the money needed to be able to advertise on TV in different districts. Okay, on to the candidates. So the Democratic candidate, Josh Riley, lost the congressional race in the last campaign in 2022 to Republican Mark Molinaro by a very small percentage, less than 2%. Josh has a compelling personal story. He was born in Endicott, which is a town in the western part of the district, and when he was growing up, plants closed down and moved overseas. His family, friends, neighbors lost their jobs, and ever since then, he's cared very deeply about good jobs for people, and he's a strong union supporter. I think he's a fabulous campaigner. He is able to talk to very different audiences, and I always liked that he actually had a sense of humor, but he was also a prodigious fundraiser, which really mattered in this district. Mark Molinaro, who was the incumbent in the 2024 race, has a long record in public office. He was elected mayor of Tivoli, New York, before he turned 20. He served as the Dutchess County legislator and the Dutchess County executive. He was also a New York State Assembly member, and he was the 2018 Republican nominee for governor of New York. He tried to present himself as a moderate, although he voted with MAGA Republicans. He comes across as personable. I talk with people who said, oh, he listens to us, but I would say, look how the man votes. But he did present himself in this kind of personable, supposedly moderate way. So why did Josh win? First, I think Josh Riley won because people put in the work. I want to emphasize that. I think that's the key to his winning. There are other important factors that I'm going to go over from my perspective. There was an incredible amount of canvassing, and I think that was also very important. His campaign made canvassing the priority, and volunteers stepped up. New York State Democratic staff repeatedly told us that NY19 was the most canvassed district in all the country. Yeah, and that says a lot. A broad array of groups bolstered the effort. This included unions, it included activist groups, and it included Democratic clubs like Three Parks. So as Danielle has said, Three Parks wrote postcards for Josh Riley focused on areas where it was hard to canvass, rural areas where houses are very far apart, for example. And over 1,800 postcards were sent to try to get Josh Riley elected. We also arranged for 6 phone banks for Josh Riley, among all the other work that Danielle has highlighted. Another important factor in the victory was much better support from the Democratic Party in the 2024 race than in the last one that Josh lost. There were more field offices, very evident, and more staff. The staff who I saw in the counties where I volunteered, I thought were very committed and competent. From my standpoint, at my age, with my white hair, I thought they were very young. But honestly, they give me a lot of hope for the future. And Josh, as I said, was an incredible fundraiser, in addition to the money coming in from the Democratic Party. So, with the money available, there were TV ads and coverage despite the multiple media markets. I would also say that some activist groups that I was involved in started working very early. I worked with a group called New York 19 Votes. We started in February of 2022, so well before the campaign, and kind of identified volunteers, got out there canvassing, opposing Molinaro on his stands, and I also think that made a difference. So, keeping to my very short presentation, I would say we won because we had a great candidate, we had committed volunteers from a broad range of organizations, we had good support from the Democratic Party. I think all of these contributed to a hard-won victory that, to me, is a ray of light and hope in a very dark national scene. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam, and thank you especially for bringing Josh to us. Many of us were able to participate in the phone banks that Miriam arranged, and as you heard, almost 2,000 postcards. I'm going to introduce Donna Lieberman, Executive Director of the New York Civil Liberties Union, who will speak. But I just want to say, because Miriam was referring to a lot of things that Donna didn't hear about at the time, which is that we had a campaign center at 105th Street and Broadway. We sent multiple buses to Pennsylvania filled with 40 to 50 people at a shot. We successfully worked for the election of Laura Gillen, the re-election of Pat Ryan, and the election of Josh Riley, thank goodness. So it wasn't all dark around here. We had several hundred volunteers. We had 243 people writing 8,000 postcards, and so it was a very busy time for us. Donna is a real fighter for the causes that Three Parks works on. She is indefatigable. She is at every rally that I attend for my job against keeping Rikers open, to keep Rikers, to get the population down, to close down the jails, and so many other things that I will let Donna tell you about. So let's please give her a warm, warm welcome.
Hi guys, thank you for inviting me here tonight. I wish I had all the answers or even some of them. But I really, I live near here and I spent a lot of time during early voting on election day up down the block. Some of you I probably saw. I love that some of you were pissed off that that our folks had like Prop 1 stuff and we didn't always have 2 through 6 stuff. I love it that you were committed to stop defeating 2 through 6. We were too. We just had to separate. Anyway, we had to separate the 2 activities. I'd rather talk to you than the mic, but okay. Is that better? Okay. So anyway, I want to thank you guys for being out there in this election, notwithstanding the results, notwithstanding the fact that I'm nonpartisan. And I mean, I'm not, but the NYCLU is. I think that I'm right in saying, you'll know this better, but, the results of this election indicated a depressed turnout citywide and a smaller distance between Harris and the guy who won than we would have thought or liked. But I think in this area, that wasn't the case. So it's a credit to you guys. Maybe my facts are wrong. I think I read that. So I like it that you guys are out there all the time. So this all sucks. You didn't need me to tell you that. But what I would like to tell you is some of the areas that the ACLU and NYCLU, as the New York affiliate of the ACLU, are working on to push back against the juggernaut that is clearly coming. It's been promised and it is coming full force. And the ACLU nationally has been preparing for this possibility, despite the resistance of many of us not wanting to accept the possibility. I'll admit that. But we actually put our heads together and met many times over the last few months to plan for a new Trump regime. And there's a lot we can't do, but there's a lot we can do. And some of it is still ideas about what we're going to do, and some of it is more specific. Most important, one thing that we did in anticipation of this moment was to get Prop 1 passed, okay? And thank you for your help in doing that. That was top priority for the NYCLU. And we faced a monumental campaign by the ultra-right, right, to distort what it was about, to use it to attack immigrants, to attack trans people, and to scare people and to divide us. They had more money in those last 2 weeks of the campaign for TV and social media ads than we had raised in the entire year and a half that we were working on this. Am I talking too loud? I'm getting yes and no. Okay, great. I can talk out of both sides of my mouth, maybe. And it should be encouraging to us. In addition to that, we have enshrined, or will have by January 1st, state constitutional protection for abortion, for reproductive rights, for LGBTQ rights, prohibitions against government discrimination based on age, disability, national origin, and ethnicity. It's a big deal, and it's a bigger deal now that that son of a bitch is in office than it would have been otherwise. And while Prop 1 does not protect immigrants, it does protect us against the kind of profiling that Joe Arpaio did, and that is the platform of the president, the elected president. So it's important, it's good. There's a lot of work to be done about implementation and guidance for implementation, but I'm so proud of that. And that is part of building the firewall in the states against the Trump regime. In other words, building protections so that no state resources are utilized in service of their agenda, their repressive agenda. That includes, among other things, figuring out a mechanism to prevent the deployment of the military, the National Guard, in service of their immigration roundups and deportations. That includes resisting and reining in what's known as fusion centers, which are intelligence gathering collaboratives between state and local police and the federal military to gather information, share information, and use it however they choose. And we know that however they choose is going to be to surveil ordinary citizens, to surveil their political opponents, to surveil you and me, and to intimidate us and prevent political protest. So we want to rein that in. And that's a big project because it's very complicated. Secondly, on immigration. There's so much pain on its way, okay? And we're not going to be able to stop a lot of it. But what we can do, once again, in the same vein, is finally pass New York for All, which is legislation that has been hanging out in the state legislature that would prevent the use of state and local resources, the deputization of local law enforcement in service of ICE, in service of the deportation machine. That's been on the back burner. Right? There's no way the legislature was going to pass this last year and looking towards an election year. Now they have no choice. This is kind of the Dobbs moment for immigration. We got to pass New York for All, and that's something you all can help work on. Another thing that we're going to have to do, and this is something that is a very local thing, is to shore up the protections that we have in New York City for what's called sensitive locations. You know, shelters, hospitals, schools, so that, at courts, so that those are places that ICE is not allowed, okay? Every mayor since fucking Giuliani talked about immigrants as the lifeblood of New York or something like that, right? And this guy, we're doing great on the electeds, right? Anyway, this guy has done so much damage, has spent so much time demonizing immigrants here in New York. We have to, I think, regain the momentum. We have to regain the narrative about how immigrants are people, our neighbors, our friends, our relatives, us, and perform such important functions in our city, whether it's taking care of our kids or running the research laboratory at fancy institutions. So we have to try to reclaim the narrative, but we have to protect certain institutions, particularly our schools, from ICE raids. And that involves some policy work that has to be done, pressure on the city, and I think there's also some work that has to be done at the very grassroots level, setting up networks, secure signal chats and the like, so that an alert goes out, so that everybody in a particular area knows if and when ICE shows up. It gets down to that. That's not stuff that the NYCLU can be involved in, but other people will be. Thirdly, on the repro rights and gender equality issues, once again, and yes, there's a theme that begins to emerge, it's critical that we shore up and shore up the implementation of our SHIELD laws and pass legislation. We need some more legislation to prevent information sharing of patient data. Electronic health records are so wonderful. Your doctor has access to everything, boom, in a flash, from Weill Cornell to Columbia Press to NYU, blah, 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 and so does fucking Alabama. Okay? So we have some legislation already done. There's more to do. I'm not going to go into the details, but there's stuff to learn and mobilize around. We have to prohibit data sharing without a very, very clear consent that you have to give and get over and over and over again, affirmatively, no passive data sharing. And we also have to prohibit data brokers from being able to buy and sell the data about where our cell phones are going and being used, because that data tells Alabama or Florida or Texas that somebody has been to Planned Parenthood. So we don't want all this great technology that makes our health care access, our records access, so much easier for us and our doctors to be used as a sword to hurt people in other jurisdictions who come here for care. That applies to abortion. It obviously also applies to gender-affirming care. And then finally, surveillance. There's a theme here. We have to mobilize to rein in the surveillance machine, surveillance technologies, and the use of and sharing of surveillance technologies against political protest, as well as ordinary, everyday stuff. We have a mayor here who is in love with technology. We need transparency about technology, what it can do, how it's being used, how it is being shared, and we need to rein it in. So that's just kind of a short, very top-line summary of some of the things that we need to do. It's interesting, so much of the work that the NYCLU has been doing of late has been around criminal justice reform. And I'm not supposed to use the term criminal justice anymore because there's no such thing as the criminal justice system because it's not just. But, we will continue to do that work. We have to continue to do that work. But as the in anticipating what's coming down the pike from the Trump regime, what I named just now is sort of where we at the NYCLU and ACLU are focusing our energies. So I can stop here, ask me any questions you want, and it's early in this campaign, as it were, and so I'm happy to say I don't know when I don't know, because I won't know everything.
So I just want to say, before we begin questions, first of all, thanks to Donna. When we were on the street with our palm cards that I mentioned earlier, we were saying nix, nix on 2 through 6, and it's Donna who came up with that on Errol Lewis one night. So I just want to say that. Please limit your questions to actual questions. That way we can call on as many people as possible. And Chuck has microphones. Please wait for them. Sir, I believe you had your hand up.
Does Three Parks have a position on buildings that buy supplies through organizations that on their catalog say they donate their money to right-wing organizations? I mean, you talk about resources leaving the area. How about our money?
So Three Parks doesn't have a position on how buildings spend their money, if that's what you're asking.
That's what I'm asking, yes. But we just heard about how we don't want our resources leaving the area. But our money, it's a resource.
I'm not quite sure I'm getting it, but if you have a question for Donna, that would be great.
Okay, Donna. How do you feel about that?
Well, so your question brought to mind something that I didn't say, and I was sorry that I didn't. So let me say it, which is, here in our little Upper West Side bubble, it's comfortable and feels okay to sort of like be very fastidious about who we get into political bed with. I think that if we are going to be able to meaningfully push back against this regime and build the power necessary to overturn it in the midterms and thereafter at the ballot box. When I talk about regime change, I talk about at the ballot box through free and fair elections. We have to build a movement that is broad, that is inclusive, that doesn't marginalize anybody for who they are, yet recognizes that we live in a place, in a society with a history of massive, deep discrimination and, for some people, slavery. That's a mouthful, and it sounds really nice, at least to me, but it's very hard. And I think that those of us who aren't religious have to think about how we engage with people for whom a church or a temple is a center of activity, of engagement. Those of us who are parents and have kids in school need to think about what it is about our schools and our engagement with our schools that lends itself to, so many things, aside from educating our kids appropriately, but building critical thinking for the kids, dealing with book bans, figuring out how to deal with that. You might not have it, at PS, blah, 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 but you might. You'd be surprised. And so we have to think about getting outside of our comfort zones to talk to people and not dismiss them who might disagree with us. I believe that a lot of good people bought a whole lot of bad shit, okay? And I believe that when people get their reality from the right wing, which is not news media, it's just a propaganda machine, that it's going to take a lot for us to counter that. But we're not going to counter it by calling people assholes or racists. We have to figure out how to really engage with people. Good luck with that. I personally am not very good at that. I'll be honest, I have a whole list of it. I don't have a list of assholes, I have a list of who's not an asshole. No, just kidding. But I think we have to think about ways outside of the usual suspects and allies. And we have to be forgiving. We have to have a big tent. Now, I'll tell you what the reference point for me. The Women's March. Remember how wonderful that was in 2016? We had millions of people across the country in the streets saying, we will resist, right? And there was like a 10-point program of like what we owed, the principles. Nobody read it because we were just all out there for the Women's March. But over time, people started reading it and heeding it, and it was like not the way to organize. It was the way to deorganize, to narrow our movement. We can't make that mistake again. We can't. That was a disservice to all of us. It may have been politically so wonderful, but it was a disservice.
Eli, and then, well, we'll keep Shoshana and then some other people. But please do limit yourself to an actual question.
I'm being told to move away from the speaker. I had a question. Thank you so much for being here. Your thoughts on the dignity, not detention bill, which, as I understand it, at the state level would prevent New York State from contracting with the federal government to essentially imprison people going through deportation proceedings. So I'd love your thoughts on that. And the second question I had is, what is your understanding about the likelihood of a special session before Trump takes office in the New York State legislature to try to enact some of these things prior to his actually taking office in January?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, the bill to prohibit New York entities from contracting to become immigration detention centers is a challenging one, because on the one hand, we don't want to become a vehicle for mass incarceration and roundups of immigrants. On the other hand, if people who are rounded up are not detained locally, they're going to be shipped far away from their support systems and their families. I think it's fine for people to disagree on this. It's very complicated. Institutionally, we've taken a position in support of that because I think that in the hopes that New York will not become a place where there are tens of thousands of immigrants languishing in our county jails. So there's that. The other question was, special session. So you never know. I mean, I have no crystal ball and not enough access to the leaders to know whether they'll do it. But can I use your question to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart? Thank you. Which is East Ramapo. East Ramapo. The East Ramapo Central School District is in Rockland County. It is a school district with 9,000 public school kids and about 20 or 30,000 private school kids who are the children of the ultra-Orthodox sects. They dominate the school board. The NYCLU sued to end the winner-take-all system of electing the school board. We won that case, we got a award system, but what that meant was that we got only 3 members of the school board from the black and brown communities, and the rest were elected by the Hasidic, the ultra Hasidic voting bloc. I didn't mention the public school students. The public schools are 97% black and Latino. They used to be overwhelmingly black, and over the past decade or so, it's become like maybe 40% black and the rest Latino. And by the way, a lot of people with immigration issues. The ultra-Orthodox have systematically robbed and pillaged, and plundered taxpayer funds to siphon it off into the yeshivas. The NYCLU has been working with the community there, the NAACP, the Latino parents, to try to wrest control of the finances of this school district so that the funds are used for education and not to pay. They spent more money on school buses than any district, 9,000 kids, than any district in the state except for New York City. That's how much I think it's like 30% of their budget. And I'm not going to go into it. So we have been pushing the state ed department to take over fiscal control. There's already a monitor in there because this is 21st century Jim Crow. And kids go to schools where for a decade they've known that there are no working water fountains, that all the water fountains are contaminated with lead, and they still haven't fixed it. So the list of the parade of they sold off school buildings to the Hasidic to the Hasidim to yeshivas at bargain basement prices. So the school buildings that are remain for the public school kids are in a shambles. They're unsafe, they're unhealthy, and they're falling apart. So the NYCLU has been trying to get a special session called so that the legislature could pass a law giving the state education department fiscal control over the school district, finally. 21st century Jim Crow, an hour outside of the city. So I wanted to tell you about it. You need to know about it. And it's not right in your house, but it's in our backyard. And we have to hold our lawmakers accountable to do right by those kids. My rant. Thank you.
Thank you. Shoshana, this gentleman, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Chuck, here at the end.
I was deciding not to say something because I couldn't put it in the...
I
couldn't put it in the...
Please limit yourself to a question.
So here's the question. What you just described about engaging the other, embracing the other, I think there are a myriad things that we have to do, but that's critical. Where can I find, through NYCLU or three parks, concrete tactical stuff to do to achieve that? Because I think it is absolutely critical to where we need to go. Thank you.
Yeah, I told you I didn't have all the answers and that I wasn't going to be afraid to say I don't know, right? When I don't know. I wish I knew. I don't know, but I think that people have to put their heads together and think about, how in my community we can do that. The NYCLU doesn't get involved in political campaigns. We're nonpartisan. The first time I got involved, I was like really, really busy at election time when the rest of you were going crazy, and I'm just sitting there waiting for voter suppression stuff to come through the door, was the Prop 1 campaign. But I know that we recruited several hundred volunteers around the state, and we're going to work with them. We're going to talk to them. and try to figure out what their networks are and how we can engage with them. It's, it's very challenging for an organization of paid professionals, lawyers, communications people, advocates, lobbyists, and a couple of organizers to actually figure out how to engage with volunteers over the course of, the non-election year. We're working on it, but I think everybody should not be afraid to join the ACLU and the NYCLU. It's 2 for 1, but also support us. We do not take government money. We're not going to get cut off by the feds. Thank you. But we do rely on New Yorkers to support us. Sign up to volunteer. We have a lot of opportunities to even just learn about the issues, to get versed in, know your rights stuff, which can be helpful. And we go to Albany, we go to City Hall, we testify. So there are things that we ask people to do. We would love for you. We know that when you guys say you're going to do something, you do it, which is very nice. So sign up with us. And if you don't want to sign up with us, I know you have your center of gravity, but there are other organizations to work with to be engaged in an ongoing way. But one thing not to do is don't burn out. And I can't tell you how not to do that either.
So we're going to take, I think, 2 more questions, Shoshana and then the gentleman in red.
Hi. So there are a few upcoming races in New York. I know we have a mayoral election next year and a gubernatorial election in 2026. I know that the NYCLU is nonpartisan, but is there a candidate that you are leaning towards as a best fit, I think, for the goals you've outlined for New York? I know,
I don't endorse anybody, but who do you like better? All I can say is that we talk about policies and programs, and you have to talk to the folks who are out there. It's not just, and it's not a single issue thing. I think when I was leafleting and talking to voters about Props 2 through 6, there's 4 of them, and they were, and 5 of them, and they were framed on the ballot as really common sense. They sounded good. Give sanitation the power to do its job. Ooh, I like that. More information about. Ooh, sounds good. Anyway, they sucked. But what I said to people was, to cut to the chase. So, do you like Mayor Adams? They would invariably say no. Do you want to give him more power and less accountability? And they would say no. I said, well, then you should vote against Props 2 through 6. Now, that's not answering your question. I'm sorry.
The gentleman in the red shirt, please.
Sorry. I know this is a general Q&A, but I want to ask for the question, is there a discussion portion of the evening that you allow people to just speak about topics that they think are important that other people need to hear?
Can you pull your mask down just for a second?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I can hear you, I just can't understand what you're saying.
Sorry, I'm a very private person. I know that this is a general Q&A, but I wanted to know if there's a discussion portion that you might have where people are allowed to speak about topics that they think other people should know about that are pertinent to, the political climate, meaning do you offer discussion?
Yeah, so after the meeting, you can approach one of the board members and we can answer your questions. But right now, we have a very loaded agenda. So if you have a question for Donna, okay. So I'm going to ask the last question then.
Oh, okay.
And then we're going to have Wendy. Is Ross here, Dan? Yeah. Okay, great. So Donna, regarding immigration, the hotel restaurant business, the construction business, and the home care industry are going to be completely undermined by having the mass deportations of immigrants and further
And
child
childcare.
separation at the border are going to be devastating for those three industries. And the childcare industry, and three at least of them, have very powerful unions. And is there any hope of having something like a women's march after January 20th? And is somebody organizing something like that that can actually be sustained? Because the problem with the president-elect is that he's so exhausting that we all get tired. But if the unions who represent at least those three industries could step up, that might actually help.
Well, the answer is I don't entirely know. I don't know. But, you know, I was at a meeting this morning that Brad Lander called to a variety of advocacy groups. Some unions were there. I don't know if the hotel restaurant workers were there to talk about the impact of the Trump regime on New York City economically and on our people. And there were a number of immigrants' rights groups there. I think that, and there was the Make the Road demonstration this weekend, and prior to that on Thursday, New York Immigration Coalition had a demonstration. You know, people needed to vent, and I wasn't able to attend either of them. Normally, I would be right out there, but I think we have to be careful. I love nothing better than a good, big, loud demonstration. And we had so many of those last time around. We have to be careful not to burn ourselves out, as you said. But I think that I mean, I was a little concerned when some of the groups went off and organized demonstrations already. We knew they were going to be small, but people needed an outlet, and so that's okay. But I hope that moving forward, if we decide to do big demos, and there is talk about something in Washington on the 20th, I think. I don't know the details yet, but we'll find out. So, sorry.
All right, so let's give it up for Donna.
Yeah. And I want to acknowledge my senator who showed up.
Yes. For the rest of our agenda, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Cohen to introduce Ross Barkan. I do want to acknowledge that our senator, Brad Hoylman, is here. Please raise your hand. So with any luck, we'll hear from Ross and take some questions, and then we'll hear from Wendy Diller, who can tell us a little bit about the trips out to Long Island. And if Brad is still here, we will give him an opportunity to speak as well. Dan.
The day after Election Day, I did what I did 4 years ago, which is I now donate monthly to the ACLU. And I encourage you all to do the same. If you can't give, $100 a month or $50 a month, $10 a month, it matters. 4 years ago, 8 years ago, people donated so much to the ACLU, they had the resources they needed to be able to challenge all of the crazy things that Trump did in all 50 states. And it was amazing for them to have those kind of resources, and they're going to need it again. So please, it's not a lot of money on a monthly basis. You won't even notice a cup of coffee or 2 or 5. Donate to the ACLU because they are the ones who are going to safeguard this country's democracy if our president won't. Please. I've known Ross Barkan for maybe 20 years. When he first ran actually for the state senate in Brooklyn, following a tradition of political activism into being a reporter. I have all of his books. He's written 3 and a 4th one. Glass Century or Last Century? Glass Century is coming out shortly. I encourage you to get it. Ross has been a reporter in New York Times Magazine. He has written in Crain's. I read him regularly on a weekly basis, and I enjoy his commentary. I don't always agree with him, and I really enjoy his perspective, and I hope you will enjoy what he has to say tonight and ask him hard questions. Ladies and gentlemen, Ross Barkan.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. I spoke to you a while ago on Zoom, so it's exciting to be here. Sorry, I'm trying to get this up to my level a little bit. About like here. Yeah, that's good. You hear me good? So yeah, I'm very excited to be in front of you again, this time in person, much better than being behind a screen. So I'll talk for a few minutes. I know the election is on everyone's mind and what's coming next, so I'll give my quick thoughts on kind of what happened last week and sort of where Democrats go and from here, and also kind of what a second Trump administration could look like, and you're starting to see that take form as we speak. And happy, of course, to take questions. So I spoke to groups like this 8 years ago in the wake of the 2016 election, and obviously that election to this election is quite different, and I don't have to tell you why. The 2016 election was one that Hillary Clinton won in terms of winning the popular vote. She did not win the Electoral College, but there were many reasons one could ascribe not to her candidacy or to the Democratic performance for that outcome. Whether those reasons were valid or not going to litigate 2016 again and again. We've all done that for many years now. I think that the bigger story, which you all are aware of, is that the Democrat did not win the popular vote for the first time in 20 years. And so while that margin narrows, and I do think this was a very close election, it was not a landslide by any means. We are a divided nation. We are almost a 50-50 nation, roughly. There's no doubt that this time Trump did much better, and that has real implications for the country, for the Democratic Party. He improved with virtually every single group in almost every part of the country, including in New York City, where he hit a high watermark for a Republican in the last 30 years. And of course, some of that was Democratic turnout that fell and Trump motivating his base to show up. That's also politics. So there certainly is now a real reckoning for the Democratic Party that one has not seen in a generation. This reminds me, I was much younger then, but the 2004 election in which George Bush defeated John Kerry, and there's no arguing that Bush was the rightful victor, having won a popular vote as well as the Electoral College. So Trump, say what you will, he won this race. You can talk about misinformation, you can talk about money spent, but their campaign won, Kamala Harris is lost. And so I don't want to linger too much on her campaign and kind of the year that was, other than to say, from my view as someone who watched it up close, who went to both conventions, have been following Democratic politics and even participating in it for some time, I do think one big difference between the two candidates, Trump and Harris, well, many differences, but one is that Trump had a very clear message in the election and Harris did not. That's not everything. I think it's important to remember that incumbent parties across the world have really struggled over the past few years. You pick a country, the incumbent party, with the exception of Mexico, really, has lost, including in the United Kingdom. Justin Trudeau's party is in deep trouble in Canada. So these are currents that were outside of her control. Obviously, she took over in sort of extraordinary circumstances that perhaps should not have been in retrospect, but it is what it is. But I do think the Democratic messaging was not strong enough, putting aside all the concerns about inflation and immigration. Clearly, something didn't click, something didn't resonate from the top of the ticket. And it's not all doom and gloom. The Democrats actually performed fairly well, all things considered, down the ballot. The Senate races looked much more disastrous on election night. Turns out they were not. Republicans will have a 53 majority in the Senate, which is, I believe, the same as they had in 2017. It's a real majority. It's enough to certainly do legislation, but it's also not a massive majority. The same thing in the House. The Republicans are forecasted to have the House, but not a massive majority. Still, unified control of government. Trump won, Harris lost. Many reasons why, but I do think one thing you can start to think about is like, what was the argument and the message of the Kamala Harris campaign? And I do feel strongly about this. anti-Trump resistance is going to have to change. The messaging did not work. Whether you think he's a fascist or not, he's been elected. We can argue about that forever, but the point is Americans were not persuaded. And that's important to think about. Why, in terms of electoral outcomes, Trump got stronger from 16 to 20 to 24. In each election, he ran better than the last. Many reasons for that, but that is something for all of you and Democrats in general to think about. How will this time be different than last time? Now, there are many more reasons to worry about Trump than 2017. Trump, of course, now is an experienced politician, still impulsive, still reckless, still incendiary, still making appointments as we speak that might not be confirmed in the Senate. We don't know, but certainly some of them might fail. But he comes in with more loyalists and more experience. And I think, as I follow Donald Trump, and I have for a long time, and as all you have as well, I do think the thing to keep in mind is policy versus rhetoric. There's a lot of rhetoric that comes from Trump. Trump says a lot of things. He says hateful and bigoted things. He says unhinged things. He says strange things. If you go, not that any of you have been to a Trump rally, I've covered several of them. You know, he goes on for hours and hours, and he has many bits, and you can pick out some and point to them and say, wow, Trump said this, said that. The reality is it's important not to really fixate on Trump's words. I don't think it was ever that vital to do it, but I think now more than ever, it's about policy and outcome. And I think it's very important to look at who he's appointing, what sort of policies he's going to pursue, and then have some strategy, whether obviously the ACLU is a strategy, have some strategy to combat it in some form. Because while certainly protesting and marching is very valid, and mass protest is very valid, that alone is not going to do the trick. And I think you saw the last time around with Trump some of the limits to the Democratic resistance. There were things that were accomplished. Democrats did take back Congress. Biden was elected. That's all very true. But Trump himself did not vanish. Trump was not weakened and enfeebled by all this. And of course, he has continued onward. So really think about, you know, what is it that Donald Trump is going to do, right? Whether it's on immigration, whether it's on tax policy. I do think certain things that he might want to do will not be able to be done. One talking point that I think did not land with the electorate writ large was the fact that Republicans would pass a national abortion ban. I do think in some way voters understood that was unlikely. And indeed, I would say today, while it's terrible to be in a red state and to need an abortion, there will be no national abortion ban. Simply the votes aren't there. So it's going to be a very interesting time where Trump will come in with a lot of power. At the same time, like any president, he will be constrained to a degree by the office as much as he will want to use the Justice Department to chase his enemies, as much as he's going to try to initiate a mass deportation regime, which he certainly can. There's also the reality of Congress as well. And the fact that even if every single Republican supports him in every measure, which I don't think will happen, he doesn't have great margins. So while there's a lot of reason to feel disappointed about the election, it really went terribly for the Harris campaign and for Democrats not beating Trump, I would say the bright spot is it's really a time to reset. I think the Democratic Party was in desperate need of new leadership. There are a lot of very talented Democrats nationally in the Senate, governors. I'm sure you all have your favorites, members of Congress, former Biden administration officials who really have a chance now to go forward and start to make their arguments for the future of the party. And I think there's a level of, I don't want to call it excitement, but it's very wide open now in a way it hasn't been in decades, where the future of the party will be shaped by people like you, will be shaped by the candidates running. We not have a open primary this year for obvious reasons. 2020 you did. It was also shaped by Trump and COVID. It was a strange one. And of course 16, even then, Clinton versus Sanders, it wasn't your typical wide open, a bunch of candidates run and someone wins. So this really is a time for the old leadership to move on. And it's not just about age, it's about those who've just been in power for a very long time. Obama aides, Clinton aides, Biden aides, they've done great things. They've certainly steered the party well to a degree. And I think Biden had real significant policy accomplishments that will come into view as time goes on. It's the sort of thing that's hard to sell 1-2 years in, but I think like green industrial policy, these are things 10, 20 years from now people will talk about. These are things Republicans themselves are, to a degree, going to want to safeguard, especially when money is flowing into their districts. And you're seeing that already. But it really, it is time, and I think broadly Democrats understand this, it's time to turn the page. And that can be a good thing. You've had the same operative class, the same leaders, generations really haven't turned over. If you think of from Clinton to Biden to Harris, it's all sort of a similar Obama, Clinton, Biden world deciding things. And again, that's not the worst thing. They all were serious people with serious accomplishments. But now it's time for a different generation. And we don't know what that generation is going to look like. We really have no idea who's going to take the reins, who it's going to be, who's going to merge. But I think there's real opportunity there. And I think the Democratic Party now has a chance to really get serious about its messaging, to rebuild in states it's been bleeding support badly, and those are really rural states. And I think you see some representatives who've done very well, whether Jared Golden in Maine or Gluesenkamp Perez in Washington State, and Dan Osborne ran as independent in Nebraska, but actually did very well. So there are performances you can point to and say that there's kind of a path forward here for the left, especially beyond deep blue places. And of course, there are issues in New York City. I've even talked about the mayoral race. I can talk about that forever and ever, but the reality is I do believe there's going to be a different mayor come 2026. I have no idea who that mayor will be. I think Eric Adams is finished politically, whether he is found guilty or not. And so that too, that will also be removed. I think whoever it is, it's going to be a very different type of mayor. You all in this room are hungering for different things, and I think you're going to get it. I think there's going to be a real primary. We're going to see who emerges, rumored candidates. We'll see if a Cuomo comes out or not. I don't know. Or if Adams resigns. Adams has no interest right now, and he might not. But the reality is Eric Adams is not Donald Trump in that he can't win under indictment. He's very unpopular, and he will not win the Democratic primary. I don't like to make predictions. That's one I will make with a decent amount of confidence that you will have a new mayor a year hence. So it's a time of transition and change. I think that's scary for many reasons. Obviously, what Trump can do is scary, but it's important to remember the country will endure. Bad things can happen, but it's a 200-plus-year-old republic. It's a flawed republic. It's got many problems that when we're building a country from scratch, you would not choose to design it this way. But here we are. And so if you look around the country now, look even to 2026, too, to the midterms, I think Democrats have a real chance to grow their House majority in the future. I think the Senate map was very bad for them in this cycle. The Senate map starts to get better. The reality of Trump, too, is this might be his high point in terms of popularity and acceptance. All presidents, the bloom comes off the rose. It happened for Biden. For Trump, honestly, I think it'll happen pretty quickly. I could even see a lot of his moves just backfiring politically. And, you know, he's a lot of things, Trump, but he's not a genius, and he doesn't have it in him to dominate and subdue the United States of America. He lacks the interest and the attention span. That doesn't mean he can't do bad things and be destructive. I would never argue that. It's just that it's not a time to be, like, despondent, I think. The election was a very bad outcome for Democrats, but again, I do think it's an opportunity. And I don't know, I genuinely don't know. I gave you one prediction about Adams, but in terms of the National Party, I genuinely don't know who's going to emerge, what wing, progressive, center, left. You know, you can talk forever and ever about labels, messages. The truth is, sometimes labels aren't the most helpful. It's about what policies resonate with people. How do you speak to people's economic pain? How do you speak to their daily struggles? How do you offer them something? What policies can you offer them to really change their lives? Because I think there's a reason to get very nihilistic about elections and say nothing matters, Elon Musk, misinformation, whatever. The reality is things do matter, and inflation really hurt Democrats, and the fact is people saw their grocery bills go up. They saw it being harder to afford a home. They punished the Democratic Party for it, but that also means that we still live in a world of reality for all the problems out there. So there is, I would say, opportunity on the national level, and I think locally too. I mean, I think it's going to be a fascinating year next year for the Democratic Party here, and certainly something to think about too. I'll close, and I want to take questions. I could talk for hours on this stuff. Why certain groups are leaving the Democratic Party in New York City especially, and that's an uncomfortable discussion that I do think Democrats have to have. Why have Spanish-speaking voters in the Bronx and in Queens moved into the Republican column? Still Democrat majority, but you see real trends to the right. The Asian community, this is something I've followed. I'm from Brooklyn, southern Brooklyn, so I've seen this up close for years. The working class Asian community used to be in the Democratic column, moving into the Republican column. You saw, while Democrats had a pretty nice night in the state legislature, they lost the supermajority but won a lot of seats. A Democrat in Brooklyn lost her seat to a Republican, a seat that a few years ago no one would think would flip, was a deep red turnout in southern Brooklyn. So those are things to think about, how the Democratic Party can start to reverse some of those losses, because you don't want to be in a situation where the mayoral race come November of next year is competitive. And of course, you remember when that used to be. Of course, some of that was Bloomberg spending absurd amounts of money, but still looking at Trump getting 38% in Queens. I'm trying to remember his total performance in New York City. He held Kamala Harris under 70%, which hasn't happened for a Democrat in a long time. Those are trends. I mean, you can talk about turnout fell out here. These people didn't show up. The reality is there are real trends into the Republican Party in New York City. The Republicans aren't quite organized enough, I think, to take advantage of it fully, but they're there. So I think that's something, too, for you and for Democrats in general to think about, too. What does the party look like? How do you have a multiracial working class coalition? How do you bring different voters into alignment who maybe don't always share the same views on issues but still can be reached? I think these are all fascinating questions to consider, and definitely it's a frightening and uncertain time, but also it's a time of opportunity. I think, remember, too, 2004 seemed like a very low point for the Democratic Party. Of course, Nancy Pelosi became Speaker 2 years later. Obama's elected in 2008. No one in 2004, unless you were really you just loved Obama or had some sixth sense, thought this man would be president 4 years later. Obviously, he gave a great speech at the convention, but times change. Times are unpredictable. So I think whatever ideas you have, just you always keep an open mind. I try in my world of writing and reporting to not let my preconceived notions kind of cloud me, because I can think I know what's going to happen, but also none of us truly know. But that also means things are wide open too. So happy to take questions. I can talk forever and ever, but want to hear from all of you.
So before I take questions, I just want to say again, please limit yourself to a question. But I just want to say Thank you so much for really focusing on how we can be positive about what's happened, because it's hard to pick us off the floor.
Yeah.
Hard for us to pick ourselves off the floor. So many questions. Deborah first, then Dan. Sorry to make you run, Chuck.
I agree with both you and Donna that in spite of how upset we are about the outcome of this election, we really need now just to stop the 24/7 Trump bashing and try to embrace the other and work with the other. When I've mentioned this to friends of mine, they scream and yell at me that I'm crazy and how can we embrace a criminal and blah, blah. How can we get people to understand that that's the way forward?
Yeah, I think it's, look, it's not, you don't have to say Trump's a good person, you can keep detesting him, that's fine. I think what you have to keep in mind is to separate Trump from the people who vote for Trump. And that's very hard. I grew up in a Republican-leaning neighborhood, so I know people who've supported Republicans for a long time. I have family who are Republican too. So I think you have to make that separation. Trump is one thing, but he got 75 million votes. Are 75 million people all rabid, racist, and evil people? Is that half the country? I think that's a silly diagnosis. I think People have said that America's a failed country, but that's also democracy, right? So I think it's to separate them out. It's to remember that that's a lot of people, and also people are persuadable. Like I do think there was this tendency, and I think it's changing, I really do, in the Democratic Party to get a bit nihilistic about it, to look at, oh, these people are too far gone, they're all crazy, we just have to turn out our people and we'll win all the elections. And it's not how it works. Yes, we're a very polarized country, but also, you look at the 7 swing states, Trump won them all. They're all some were within 1 point. I think the biggest looked like Arizona was 51-47. They're still counting. So these are close races. Literally, you have 7 states all within a couple of percentage points. You can't look at that and go, my God, there's nothing we can do. I think it's realizing you have to figure out how to reach people. A lot of you have canvassed. I don't have to tell you, but you talk to people on the doors. You know, I canvassed in my former life. You know, people have political views that are all over the place. I think it's easy to think red versus blue, staunch Democrat, staunch Republican. You talk to people out even in New York City, but you go out to the rest of the country, they may lean left on something. They may lean right on something else. They may be like, you know what? I'm mad at the Democrats about inflation. I'm going to give Trump, like, who cares? You know, some people despair and don't vote at all. So I think it's to keep that in mind that a vast majority of Americans are not doctrinaire politicos. They're not thinking in the way of, I love the Republican Party or I love the Democratic Party. There isn't that brand loyalty. It's like they get excited about things or they can hate the other party, but there is persuasion to be done. And I think messaging matters. I think it really does. Yes, there's macro factors. I think there are things out of your control, but what you say does matter. And I do think Trump, for all his crazy things he says, had a very succinct message when you boiled it down. Immigration wasn't popular. He was an anti-immigrant. He talked about tariffs. You can hate tariffs. He talked about tariffs. He also talked about war in an interesting way, where Kamala was campaigning with the Cheneys. Once upon a time, I know Liz stood up against Trump 20 years ago. Dick was the devil in this room and orchestrated the most disastrous foreign policy conflict of maybe the last 50 years outside of Vietnam, right? So Trump, I think, wisely was attacking her for being with the Cheneys. There's a lot of people who are veterans of Iraq who remember it and were upset about it. So again, I just think, yeah, don't despair and just realize, yes, there are people who will never listen to you, but it's a big country. 75 million people, you know, they're reachable. They're not all like Trump clones. No one is.
Dan, and then the gentleman here, Chuck, next to Doug.
Could shout it if you want. Okay.
Here we go. Okay. So my question is that even though there's been a fair amount of criticism about the message that the Democrats had in this election and how that was not resonating, I'm also curious about whether there was just sort of a larger global trend of throw the bums out. They've changed governments in Canada and Australia and Germany and England. There's been a significant sort of wind of change from people post-COVID recovery, hangover kind of feeling. And that's not to discount the message that we had that didn't seem to resonate, but I also want to know if it was, to what extent you feel that may have been part of it as well.
Oh, definitely. And that's why I say, yes, the macro conditions also matter. There's no doubt incumbent parties, everywhere you looked except Mexico and AMLO and his sort of left populist movement, which, you know, has delivered for working class people in Mexico and has won popularity there. Overall, yes, it was a throw the bums out era. Inflation is a global problem. I think you mentioned COVID fatigue. I mean, the reality is there was backlash against COVID lockdowns. They certainly, in the early months, were necessary. I would not argue against them, but the reality is some school districts, actually not New York City's, but others around the country, stayed closed a very long time. There was consternation about that, and there's general just distrust and anger at those in power, at sort of professional class, those in power. That was the Democrat. So yes, I do think there's no doubt Harris was dealt a tough hand. I have been very critical of her campaign in my own writing, but there's no doubt even the best communicator, the most talented person, would have been in a very tough race, and you're winning it narrowly. So I don't discount that you pick a country, incumbent parties are getting blown out. Democrats, all things being considered, if you look at like the performance of the conservatives in the United Kingdom, Democrats did a lot better. Some of that is Trump too. I think it's easy. You know, Trump has won 2 elections, lost 1. You go, oh my God, Trump, he's unstoppable. He's like this dark magician of politics. I mean, he's not. He's a flawed politician. I think a different Republican could have won by even more. I mean, that's also a fact. If you had a sort of a normal but smart Republican running a hard race, maybe that popular vote percentage is even higher. So yeah, it's a hard time for incumbent parties, but the reality is he's the incumbent now. And I think that's also Trump, come January, he owns everything. So all the complaints are his. He's got to deal with the Middle East. He's got to deal with Ukraine. He's got to figure out how to make some of these appointees nominees get confirmed in the Senate. I don't think they're all getting confirmed, so, or maybe not. So I think he's going to have some real issues, and no doubt it was an anti-incumbent year.
Wait for the mic. Wait for the mic, please.
Sorry. Real simple question. Why was there so much hatred of Joe Biden? All the hats and the flags you see in the suburbs and out there in the country, F Joe Biden. Why?
Yeah.
He's a likable guy, or we thought so 4 years ago.
I think some of it was Republicans were very aggressive about defining him. Some of it was just the conditions of the country, again, anger about inflation, immigration, honestly. Those issues hurt him. I mean, the reality is, we can say it now, it's not about age. It's about how well you can communicate, and he could not do it. And I think that hurt him. I think, again, I don't say he's too old. I say you look at other politicians in a similar age range, and they can communicate well. You pick a politician, you hear Nancy Pelosi can communicate very well. Honestly, Bernie Sanders, he still speaks very well. A few years ago, I interviewed Liz Holtzman when she was running for Congress again, was as sharp as she was, I'm sure, at 30. So it's not about age. It's that Biden, from whatever year, you can pick a year, maybe it's 2020 to 24, really declined. And you can speculate why. I'm not that interested in it, other than if you watched, like when I went back, you think of how bad that debate went in the summer. Look how Biden debated Paul Ryan in the 2012 VP debate. It's night and day. Biden was a very good communicator for Obama. He actually was an asset on that ticket. I think Biden could not, he was not able to go out there and defend his policies. And it's hard. Obama himself was endangered in 2012, and he had to go out really into the country and argue against real headwinds for the Affordable Care Act, which then was not very popular, hadn't come into effect, but the idea was not very popular. And he was a gifted communicator, and he could do it. I think Biden simply could not sell his agenda. Some of it was very hard to sell because it's long term. I've, in my own writing, defended a lot of the Biden economic policy. I think a lot of it will bear fruit, but it's hard to go to the average person and say, hey, Chips and Sciences Act, you're going to get a semiconductor plant in your area soon, and it'll start to employ people. Oh, we're going to do a green energy revolution. We're going to reshore manufacturing here. We pumped this money into the economy so the states didn't collapse after COVID. I think the pandemic aid was underappreciated. It's hard. It's not as tangible as, we gave you a minimum wage increase, or we passed this policy, so now you've got $1,000 more in your pocket. It's difficult. So I think his agenda, under the best conditions, was hard to sell. I think he was not a good communicator anymore. He couldn't do it. And also, when you're not a good communicator, a void opens up. Who fills it? Donald Trump filled it. Say a lot of things about Trump being unhinged, incendiary. Trump knows TV. He knows how to perform. And he knows how to attack. And so Trump and the Republican apparatus, I think, was very good at attacking and defining Biden. Biden, in his apparatus, was not as good as combating it. But again, there's only so much, and I would criticize Biden's sort of operatives around him, but I'd say in their defense, it's hard if the principal cannot go out there and do a 20-city tour and speak in sort of like rally-like settings and say, this is what I did, here's what I do, here's why you're better off, and barnstorm America, do all the media, mainstream media, alternative media, all of it, right? It all matters. Together, it collectively matters. He wasn't capable. He didn't really do press conferences. He never I don't think, sat down with the New York Times, at least in years. It's hard. You leave a void and people define you.
Answers. Excellent answers. Anybody else? First Josh, then Adafe.
Okay, as difficult as it may be to even suggest this, I'm curious as to whether you think that the Democrats are just going to have to nominate a man next time to win.
No, I don't buy that. I don't. And I think that's also like defeatist and nihilistic. I think the reality is that we can say it now. Biden made a mistake picking her as vice president in 2020. There were a lot of talented women politicians in America. Amy Klobuchar routinely runs ahead of the presidential ticket in Minnesota. She did decently in the primary in 2020. She could have been topping this ticket. Maybe Klobuchar doesn't win, but maybe she does. The reality is about Harris, and this is not true for her, she was not really battle tested. You can come out of a Democratic state, there's nothing wrong with that, but she'd been in very few competitive elections. She didn't really perform well in those elections. If you look at her AG race in 2010, she underperformed. Her presidential campaign was bad. I think we kind of forget. She dropped out before the Iowa caucuses. She was polling 1 to 2%. I'm sure some of you in this room supported her. I bet most of you didn't. You probably were for Warren. Maybe you were for Biden. Maybe some Bernie people. Maybe Pete Buttigieg, right? Klobuchar. I mean, that field had a lot of talents, right? And I think the Democratic Party has very talented female politicians. Jackie Rosen just won again in Nevada. Slotkin won in Michigan. Tammy Baldwin has won again. So that's 3 women in very tough swing states and states that have, sort of, two of them are at least are in the industrial Midwest, and that sort of code's masculine. It's manufacturing and this and that. I mentioned Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, who's won now in Washington State, like 2 cycles in a row in her congressional district. She overperformed Kamala's by 6-7 points. She herself is in her mid-30s and is a very good communicator. So no, I think the problem, I hate to say it, that the wrong women were nominated, just as the wrong men get nominated too. That's also true. You could call John Kerry in 2004 the wrong man for the job. So I know I don't buy it. I think you see it in the Senate. You see governor. I mean, I didn't mention Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, won twice in Michigan. She's an executive, so you can't just say, "Oh, it's the Senate." The governor of Kansas is a woman in a red state. Laura Kelly, she's won multiple elections now. So again, I think it's about thinking like bigger and realizing no, the bench is big, and you get the right talented person, and they can win. And that's what it comes down to. Harris, she had talents. I'm not saying she didn't. I think given her past electoral performances, she was not the right person for for this election. Or being the nominee of a party is a big deal. She might not have been up for it. There's nothing wrong with that. There's many women now in the Democratic Party who I think would perform well in future elections. I really do.
From your mouth to God's ears. Adafe?
So, you're a journalist. My focus is on media specifically. Like, there's been a lot of soul searching on the Democratic Party. But, like, would the media not involve in their own soul searching of the role they play in antagonizing a lack of appearance on legacy media, quote unquote? Because when she came out of the door, she was surging and she was speaking to voters, and media were like, "You're not doing a lot of media interview, you should focus on media interview." And the 2 weeks she engaged with the media was the most difficult time in a campaign. Somebody asked her a question: how can you differentiate yourself from President Biden, knowing that she's the vice president and she doesn't want to separate herself from Joe Biden? And a lot of the media representation of her was more like, give us a 10-step plan on how you achieve X, Y, and Z. Wait, no, that's the question I'm going to. But it was never the same for Trump. So, why is the media not engaging in soul searching in their lack of ability to, persecute Trump as a case like they did to Kamala?
I mean, I am myself a media critic. I've written many negative things about the media over the years and what they do. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't think you can't. I think there comes to a point for Democrats, and I think for Republicans too, if they lose, you can't keep blaming others. Like it's not. Yes, the media can be unfair. Yes, there can be asymmetry. The reality is you've got to go and win a campaign. And that's the job of the Harris campaign. She didn't do any media for over a month, with the exception of one CNN interview where she sat with Tim Walz, which in retrospect is a very strange thing to do. There's no reason you as the nominee can't sit alone and talk to a CNN journalist, is Donna Bash, who isn't, she's whatever, but you should be able to do it. So she avoided the media for about 5 weeks. Then she did it, but it was very belated. Meanwhile, say what you will about, for example, J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance was doing a lot of media, and he was doing mainstream media. I think the funny thing is, Trump does his right-wing alternative echo chamber, his podcasts. I think that's all very true. But if you looked at J.D. Vance, for example, he sat down with the New York Times. He was doing the Sunday shows. You probably saw him on CBS, Face the Nation at some point. He was out there. He was making the case, right? So, yes, the media is very flawed, certainly. I myself have criticized the media and how it operates and the questions it asks. I think it's often not policy-focused. I think a big mistake media continues to make is not to really force real policy questions of Trump and the Republicans, what are you going to do? Can you explain this? Really get down and forget kind of the politics of things. But Harris, Team Walz, whatever, they've got to own it. You lose the popular vote at some point. That is the American people. That is a verdict. So I think in the future, Democrats will learn from this. I guarantee you, whoever the nominee is in 2028, pick a person. There's literally 10 or 20 different options. They will be doing all of it. There's this conversation now, do you need the Democratic Joe Rogan? Do you need this? Right-wing media, this and that. The reality is you show up. I myself have been interviewed many times, and I've done it. You got to just be there. You got to be on the podcast. You got to go places that might be uncomfortable. And the reality is you can win people over if you show up, and you have to do the mainstream stuff too. It all matters. There's no single place that has a mass audience anymore. No one owns the mass audience. Even Joe Rogan doesn't own the mass audience. He has an audience. It's not the whole country. CNN is not the whole country. New York Times is not the whole country. But collectively, it's a quilt. It's a patchwork. If you're a good candidate, you go everywhere. One Democrat who really did this in 2020 and helped him a lot was Buttigieg. And he, to his credit, had this insight. He really rose in the polls, for different reasons. But he was someone very early on, would speak to anyone. Didn't matter. You were small time, big time, medium time. He was there. So I think Harris had this very defensive campaign. She really didn't show up a lot. At the end, she did. But again, you can't do this stuff 3 weeks before an election. You got to be doing it. I mean, she didn't have time, but I think once she became the nominee really effectively in July 21st, if I were her, I would have been sprinting out of the gate, running, talking to everyone left and right, really defining yourself before they define you.
So it is 9 o'clock. We still are going to hear from Wendy Diller about her adventures on Long Island, and we're going to hear from Senator Hoylman Siegel. So I think we're going to take one more question, and can it please be a question without a preface?
It's just a short question. What do you think, how much the general public are actually confusedly influenced by Hollywood icons and confused with elected public servant between, acting and Hollywood performance?
So the question, so I understand, how much of the public is influenced by celebrity endorsers? Is that the question? Beyonce, Taylor Swift, all these people. I do think my hope for the Democratic Party is that this is the last celebrity election. Yes, Trump himself is a celebrity, but it's a different thing. The Democrats have run this sort of celebrity playbook now. They did it with Hillary. I don't think it served her well. They ran it back with Harris. Look, you can take a Taylor Swift endorsement. There's nothing, she has fans. You take whoever wants to support you, Oprah, Taylor Swift, Beyonce, you know, you pick a person, I think it's fine, but you can't be the candidate of the Hollywood elite. To win this country, yes, Americans like celebrities, but to the credit of American voters, they're not swayed. If they were swayed, Taylor Swift's fan base is enormous. If they were all swayed, Harris would have ran away. Oprah Winfrey, those two alone should have been carrying the country 70-30. But that's not right how it works. So I do think that in the future, yes, you take endorsements, but it's not a good idea to wrap yourself in celebrity. I do think the average person, they like celebrities, but when they're looking at their politicians, Trump himself, again, he himself is a celebrity, but he himself rails against the Hollywood elite. And I think it's important to keep that distinction. Trump is like an outsider celebrity. He's not like an A-lister. Democrats are the A-list. They're the George Clooney, they're the Beyonce. The reality is it feels good to be the A-list, but that's not really, I don't think it's how you win elections anymore. And I think also if I were like advising a nominee in the future, I'd be like, you know what, take an endorsement, do a fundraiser, don't do concerts with them, don't have them running out for you. You have to be out there on your own or get local validators. I think that time has passed. It doesn't work.
This all night. I think that we could listen to Ross all night, so I hope you'll come back and see us again.
Yes, thank you.
So let's give it up for Ross Barkan.
All right. Thank you for having me. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sorry?
When does your book come out?
May of 2025. So
all right.
Pre-order is not yet, but soon.
But we will, and we do hope you come back. Wendy Diller, board member and Long Island Railroad expert, who was taking us out there before the campaign storefront was even open. Wendy, come on up, please.
Keep this really short, and I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. I'm going to keep this really short, and I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who did canvassing, postcarding, and all the canvassing, postcarding, bus tripping, to all of the House districts and to Pennsylvania. And I think I just had one or two quick comments to make because I did work, I led some of the canvassing trips. We did a few canvassing trips to CD4 for Laura Gillen, and we also helped out and did some canvassing and a bus trip to support Pat Ryan and CD18. Both of those candidates won. I just had one or two quick comments to make, and that is that the canvassing matters. I think to the point of the gentleman who said before that we need, how do you reach out and learn about other people? I learned so much when I canvassed from just talking to people, and people really wanted to talk in a way that they haven't in previous elections, I found. And you could sense, and you got a very good sense of where some of the issues were. On Long Island, the races, the CD3, Tom Swayze in CD3 and Laura Gillen in CD4 both won, but they won by very tight margins. And that's unusual. That was incredibly tight for Nassau County. So we're going to need... Yeah, right. I'll accept all flattery, Dan. It's because of your effort, it's whatever. But I think when talking to some of the grassroots groups out there, the key issues were the microeconomy and so I just want to say very quickly, the key issues were the economy, immigrants, and culture wars. On Long Island, the culture war thing was a big thing. That said, Prop 1 passed by 11 points. Trump won by 5 points. Tom Swayze won by 3, Laura Gillen by 2, etc. Immigration, both of the winning Democrats came out ahead on the offensive on immigration. You may not like their policies on immigration, but they talked about immigration, and they talked about immigration in a way that resonated with the people out there, and that wasn't necessarily the way that progressives would talk about immigration. And just So I think that's it. And the other thing that the grassroots group said was that was that they got an early start. So they got their candidates out in public well before, like in 2023, 2022. It points to what Miriam said. And they were on the attack against Anthony Desposito very early on, and that mattered too. So it's something to think about because 2026 is coming up, and it's something we need to think about. And just one other point that I'll make is that I think one thing that I did learn from canvassing is that it would be one way we can reach out to other groups is maybe establishing liaisons with some of the other Democratic clubs on Long Island and in the Hudson Valley. And there are ways I think we can do that. So that's it. And thank you again, everyone.
Wendy,
One more thing to say. Danielle did not mention herself when she talked about the great work she did, but she ran, I don't know how many people you ran on those phone banks, but that was incredible, and the storefront and everything, so.
what Wendy particularly appreciated about the storefront was that I cleaned the bathroom. Without further ado, our own State Senator Brad Hoylman-Siegel.
Thank you so much. Brad Hoylman-Siegel, thank you, Danielle. Just here to say thank you. Thank you for your amazing effort, your storefront, your postcards, your canvassing. Thank you for canvassing to New Yorkers. I think that made a big difference. New Yorkers talking to New Yorkers about Laura Gillen and Josh Riley and others. And on Proposal 1. I remember the first time I was sent to a different state to canvass. I think it was Obama. I got on a bus with my husband. They broke us into groups. So it was me, my husband, and a young woman from the Lower East Side who was a Wiccan, a practicing witch. So it was two gay guys from Manhattan and a witch. And we were knocking on doors in Pennsylvania. So I do think it is important that we talk to each other, fellow New Yorkers, and that's why I think we had the successes that were mentioned, and that is really, gratifying. I won with 105,089 votes, so thank you very much. 84% of the vote. I got the most votes of any Democratic senator in the entire state, so that is a big deal. That speaks, of course, to three parks, to West Siders coming out to vote, to me riding the coattails of Jerry Nadler. I'll do it anytime I can. But I just want to thank you very much for all of your efforts and really appreciate it. And we will live to fight another day, even as early as next year. So thank you very much.
Wait, and the one thing I forgot to mention about Brad was that Brad came to see our buses off to Pennsylvania. All right, thank you all so much for coming. Give yourselves a round of applause one more time for all the phenomenal work you did. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.